Hello and welcome to my kitchen. I have been a part of our Slave Lake Ukrainian Cultural Society for 15 years now. Hard to believe that my twins who are off in university started out when they were in pre-K. So my name is Alexis Mitchell and I'm here today just to give you a taste of Ukraine, even though it's virtual, I guess no samples. And what I'm going to do today is show you how that we make the Nalysnyky. Now the Nalysnyky is just a fancy Ukrainian name for crepes. And the type of crepes we're making are a savory crepe today. And so what we're doing is we're going to be making a cottage cheese crepe. So I'm going to start with the filling, and what I've done is I have dry cottage cheese that all I did is took a fork and mashed up. Now if you want to do this at home, and you're wondering how you get it so fine and nice and powdery, you can freeze your dry cottage cheese first and then thaw it completely, and it just powders like nothing. It's way easier than trying to mash it. And you can also use a pastry cutter, works really well to mash the Nalysnyky. So I'm going to add to this some half and half cream and some salt and an egg that I'm gonna beat into it and mix it all up. And the other main ingredient for this, of course, where will we be as Ukrainians without dill? So what I did is I started ahead of time, and I just took some kitchen scissors, and what I did is plucked the dill off of the stems till you've got the fine leafy ferny parts, and then all you're gonna do is finely cut up the dill. And it's really nice to do this before you freeze fresh dill, because then you have fresh dill that's in your freezer and ready to use at any moment, whether you're making borscht or whether you like dill cream potatoes. That's one of my favorites. And so I've got the dill. I'm going to put about half of it in right now, and I'm going to grab a spoon and I'm just going to give this a mix. And what you're doing is at the end of this, you're just going to taste it to see if it kind of tastes dilly enough. Or you can go by sight if you like lots of dill. And this is our filling, so I'm going to just finish mixing this up, and then I will show you how to make the crepe part. Well, now that we're back, I thought I'd better mention before I get going on the batter that I am starting to preheat the oven to 350 degrees, because when you are all done making the crepes, you're going to pour some whipping cream on, because nothing is, better than more fat when it comes to Ukrainian cookery. And we are going to bake them in the oven. So now that I've got my oven preheating, I'm ready to make the batter up for the crepes. Now making crepes is more of an art than it is a science. And I can give you the list of ingredients and how to do this, but you do have to be aware that you might need to adjust by adding more flour or adding a bit more milk, depending on how thick or thin your batter is turning out once we pour it on the griddle. So I'll show you that once we're done. So basically right now I'm adding my milk to a blender, and I'm adding my water, and I've got my salt, and I've got some sugar because the sugar helps it taste a little bit better. And if you don't add the sugar, by the way, they don't taste quite the same. You need a little bit of sugar. And I've got my eggs in here that I've just kind of given them a little bit of a beat ahead of time. And they're going into my blender. And I've got some baking powder. And I need 2 tablespoons of oil. And then I'm going to add the flour. Now again, I'm going to start with 1 cup of flour, and I'm going to blend it up, and then I'm going to have to check it and see whether I'm going to add more flour today or not. And that'll happen once I heat up my griddle. So there we go. And now I just need to add 1 cup of flour. And this is where it's handy if you also have a spatula, because then you can stir it down a bit as you're blending. And it's been a while since I've used my blender, so hopefully it all goes well. Now that I have made the batter and blended it, I have my electric griddle heating. It's preheated to about 350 degrees, although the temperature is dependent on how hot or cold your griddle tends to cook things. So the Griddle's gonna get lightly sprayed. You can also use oil. And I'm just going to pour the batter and let it run. And it's really running. My griddle is not even, and you can tell it's shaped to do bacon, so it slopes a bit. That's always fun when it comes to making the crepes. I did make my batter a little thinner, and I'm noticing that it's wanting to run a little oddly, but if you make it too thick, you end up with very thick pancakes, and that's not so pleasant when you're making the Nalysnyky. You want them quite thin. And the secret to any crepe is that you do not want the crepes to be flipped. You want them to be browned on one side and gelled. They don't even have to be completely cooked. They can look slightly sticky when they're coming off of the pan, because the idea is you're going to be putting your filling and you're going to be rolling them and putting them into your pan. So this is a great time for me to talk about my pan. You can use a Corningware dish. This is a really old one that's been in the family forever and tends to get used for the Nalysnyky. However, you can use a baking dish, you can use a foil pan, you can use a 9x13 baking pan. I try and get 3 layers of the Nalysnyky in there. And you also want to pan cooking spray the pan first, and I've melted some margarine and I put a little layer of margarine on there. You could use butter, but the problem with butter is it has a very low flash point. So if you use real butter, it often will burn, and that's not so pleasant having a burnt Nalysnyky, because it does bake in the oven for about an hour, hour and a half with some cream. And these are almost ready. My temperature's pretty good. And once I roll one, you'll see how it has turned out. I like to have a couple of plates ready to take them off the grill. Often you're not doing this by yourself when you're Ukrainian in our club. We have a whole fleet of women that come in for our Malonka ahead of time, and they will be making up. They've got grills going everywhere, we got blenders going everywhere, we're making batter, we're doing all kinds of stuff. And we got filling made, and then we make them. So they're on the pan. I take a scoop of filling with a teaspoon, and I put my filling, and I can kind of mold it. It should be thick enough that you can kind of shape. And then I just roll the Nalysnyky. I like to make my layers opposite. So if you go one direction on the first layer, then you go opposite on the next layer. They're easier to take out of the pan when it's time. And now finally, without a fleet of other helpers that are magically around to make these crepes happen, I have managed to get my crepes into the pan. I've got about 2.5 layers here. In between the layers, I have poured generous amounts of melted margarine. So basically, for this pan, I used about 1/2 cup of melted margarine. And again, some people use butter, but I find it tends to burn and it's really tricky to work with. And now I have about 1 cup of whipping cream, and I'm going to pour that over top. And this is going to go into the oven, and it's going to bake at 350 degrees for between an hour and an hour and a half. Usually what happens is the cream disappears, it makes them puff and swell, and then they are ready to eat with the rest of your dinner. And now, finally, the grand unveiling. I just took the Nalysnyky out of the oven. It's been about an hour. They were really perking and bubbling, and I kind of forgot about that. I probably should have put a cookie sheet underneath with some aluminum foil just to catch any drips, because I kind of have a little smoke going on in the room. And so I am ready to take them out. Often I'll use 2 forks. You can use a pair of tongs as well. But you see they're kind of crispy on the inside. They've puffed, they're set, they're probably hotter than Hades, but I'm going to take one off and there, put it in there, and let's just go in. I'm kind of afraid to put it in my mouth because it is that hot, because it just came out of the oven, but it definitely is a creamy, oh yeah, very dilly, very creamy, excellent. So that is a bit of my taste of Ukraine for the Ukrainian Cultural Society of Slave Lake. and we are always looking for new members, and we're really trying to do the whole dance thing, but this year with COVID, it's kind of impeded our ability to grow our club, but we do hope that you consider us in the future. Thank you.